Hello and welcome to Strictly Geothermal, the official podcast of the National Geothermal Centre, a place where we give geothermal insights and opinion. I'm Matt Killier, I'm an entrepreneur and campaigner and lover of all things geothermal.
And I'm Charlotte Adams, CEO of the National Geothermal Centre and hydrogeologist, so I'm a lover of rocks and water.
So in this podcast we discuss all things geothermal, and we're thinking in particular about the things that we can do in the UK. And it turns out there's quite a lot we can do in the UK. We're on our third episode now. Last time we had a brilliant conversation with Professor John Gluyas, where we had so much fascinating detail about geothermal and why the UK is ripe for geothermal right now, the huge potential that it has in terms of providing heat and power. And so this time we're going to focus on one aspect, which is on the UK oil and gas sector. We're going to explore how this sector can really help drive a geothermal revolution in the UK, and at the same time explore whether a push into geothermal is a thing that can perhaps not save but turn around what is a declining sector currently in the UK. And we've got another fabulous guest with us this time, haven't we, Charlotte?
We have indeed, so we're delighted to welcome Innes Auchterlonie to join us this morning. Innes's background is in software development, and he has a global track record focusing on asset life extension and engineering due diligence. So he has a very strong technical knowledge combined with business experience and strategic decision making. We can also say that Innes, along with John and a couple of others as well, was a key founder member of the National Geothermal Centre, and I think I'll be correct in saying in this that it was actually your idea in the first place. So I have you to thank for our existence and for us all being here today.
No, it's appreciated. I don't think I can really take the credit. I think I did come up with the idea, and I wrote the initial letter to government to say this should be a thing. But there was a lot of work that's gone in by an awful lot of people to bring it to this point. So having an idea and writing a letter doesn't take a huge amount of effort. It's the efforts of everyone else that helps bring it into creations.
Well, it's great that you had that idea, and obviously we'd like to find out a bit more about you and the aspects related to the oil and gas sector and how they fit into the new geothermal landscape that we're seeing emerge. So you've had a varied career, obviously starting out in oil and gas and construction and project management. And you're managing director of Imrand, which you founded 10 years ago, which is a firm that uses data science and AI to engineering. And that was awarded as a Supply Chain Company of the Year in 2023. From everything you've done, can you tell us about a career highlight and also tell us about the moment that geothermal first caught your imagination?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's been a few highlights in my career. As you said, it's been really varied. I haven't spent the entirety of my career in oil and gas. I mean, when I was much younger, I had a brief stint as a circus performer, and the first time I performed in a big top was pretty exciting. That was a very long time ago. But more recently, it'd probably be winning the Innovative Supply Chain Company of the Year award in 2023 was great because it validated our ideas. I'm an engineer. You mentioned my background in software development. I did study software development when I was much younger, but realised at the time it wasn't for me. I'm dyslexic, so actually writing code at the time was really pretty difficult because compilers weren't particularly great. But applying software development and data science to engineering, it really does. What we were able to do with data science and with AI is just absolutely incredible, and it's the application of that I find really exciting. And it's what the company's become known for. It's really what we do. And it was our work in this area that helped us win the award in 23.
And when did you first get interested in geothermal and thought, yes, this is something that I want to be part of?
It goes back quite a few years now, 5-6 years ago, where I was really thinking about energy transition and where can somebody with a background like mine, which is predominantly oil and gas, genuinely participate in the oil and gas transition? Where are our skills relevant? And it wasn't necessarily about thinking subsurface in the first instance. It was really thinking about our skill sets, which was looking at mid-ocean data, looking at structures. It could have been looking at large-scale project management, all different aspects of the skills that you can find in the oil and gas industry. So myself and Chris Blake, who's the head of R&D at Imrand, he and I were sitting on a flight to Dubai. And we were just discussing, going back to first principles, how can we generate power? What energy sources are there that we can exploit? And we were discussing everything, ocean currents, sorts, just really going back to first principles as engineers. And we just kept coming back to geothermal as being, for all the reasons that you'll know, it's constant, it's so readily available, it's on demand. It was these aspects that made it really attractive to us, and then but it also just tied in really, really well with the skill sets from the oil and gas industry. Um, so really, it's first principles. We really went back to first principles as an engineer. This is just too attractive, and it's underutilized.
Thank you, Innes, and welcome to the podcast. It's really interesting. Listen to that. I want to take you back to the start of your career. So you've been in Aberdeen in oil and gas for more than 20 years. So if you think about when you started out, so that I think peak production was 99, if I'm not mistaken, for oil and gas in the North Sea. So if we go back to sort of that period to when you started out, can you sort of paint a picture for us of what was it like in Aberdeen? What was industry like at that essentially peak period of?
Very different. Much more cash available, as you would expect, for projects, and and a different mindset as well, because everything's still in full swing, and that's clearly different now. There is no getting away from the fact that the industry is in decline. I would argue that the decline doesn't have to be as rapid as it is, and that there is still opportunity. And if we're to manage the transition properly, that opportunity should be more carefully managed than it has been. And the decline that we're seeing now is in some ways slightly artificial. But nevertheless, there is, with any extractive resource, there is a natural decline. And that's inevitable, and we all have to accept that will be the case. But 20 years ago, we were talking more about the development of new fields and still a degree of expansion. Now this is about managing the transition and thinking about what we can do with the resources that we've gathered over that time. So the great engineering knowledge that we have, the great capabilities that we've developed, and how can we have a genuine and just transition. And to me, that's really important, that this has to be a just transition. I know you guys are based in Durham. I was born in Fife. I've seen the effect of unmanaged transition from other energy sources with the decline of the coal industry, and the effect that can have on communities. This lasted. Now we can still see it in the decline of a lot of mining towns. And we have to avoid that. We've got to stop that happening again. We've got to make sure that actually that when we do transition, that we understand the impact of that. When we talk about energy transition, it sounds a little bit esoteric. That it's a nice technology shift, but actually what we're talking about is industrial transition, and industrial transition has big impacts on economies and communities, and we really need to bear that in mind. We've got to be really cognizant of that, and not have more left behind communities because of it, but actually be far more positive and think about how we use these skills, these resources to best effect, and make sure that nobody gets left behind and we get the best possible outcome from it.
Yeah, and I think my next question relates to that, and your comment that the decline that is being observed doesn't need to be as rapid as it is. And obviously the oil and gas sector has traditionally been a huge employer of skilled people. I think the most recent OE UK report suggests there's about 150,000 people or so currently working in the sector at the moment. What has happened or is happening to those skilled workers? What are we seeing, and why do you think that decline is maybe more rapid than it should be?
So what's happening? Just the number of job losses in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire is pretty significant. When you look at Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce figures, for 2020 through to 2025, it was 10,000 job losses. Now that doesn't include people who retired or who just left their positions. This is people made redundant. And that's a huge percentage of the population here, and that's just in Aberdeen and Shire. That's not just talking about the numbers across the rest of the northeast, particularly right down into Tyneside and other areas that are massively affected. You can see people being paid off, but you're not necessarily seeing them showing up in unemployment figures. That's because a lot of them are simply leaving the country. If you've got transferable skills within oil and gas, you'll leave. If you have the opportunity to do so. Not everybody does. But I was out in the Middle East recently, and it was visiting Qatar Energy, Dolphin, various operators out there. And what was really interesting to note was over 50% of the engineers that I was talking to were British because they'd left the UK. And this is skills that are leaving, so we don't have the benefit of their contribution to the economy, of the tax that they generate. But eventually there will be a point where, as we see more and more of these job losses, these will translate through into unemployment figures as well. I mean, it's not that they aren't, they are, but it's just maybe not in the numbers. They don't immediately correlate, but it does have a huge effect on the economy. And it's just such a waste of talent for the country, to have people leaving, to go and, work for, oil and gas producers in the Middle East so that we can then import their LNG
Yeah.
instead of produce our own gas. I do think the decline is faster than it needs to be. And this isn't to say that I'm in any way not supportive of energy transition. Clearly not.
So
I'm active. I wouldn't have been actively pursuing clean and alternative sources of energy if I didn't believe in the energy transition and be deeply committed to it. People naturally assume that because you work in the oil and gas industry that you're a climate change denier and that you don't believe in energy transition. I don't know anybody that I work with that believes that. Actually, everybody does want to see the transition work and see it happen, but wants to see it in a measured way with coherent energy policy. You need to look to the skills and the people within the oil and gas industry and not immediately write oil and gas professionals off as being people who wouldn't support transition or won't support clean technology. It's simply not true. It's people do want to support it. They want to play a part in it. They want to know what their role can be within it.
yeah,
And the reality is there are a lot of skills. There's a lot of skills, a lot of technology, a lot of knowledge that can transfer over. And do you want to be a part of it? We've got to manage it properly, though, so that we don't want to end up with a position where we simply just lose those skills.
I'm just thinking about the sort of scale of this. So if we go back 10, 15 years, we're talking 400,000 people or so working in industry. So obviously seeing a big drop in that period in terms of the total number. And from what you talked about there, we've lost quite a lot of people to overseas. So people going to do oil and gas drilling in the Middle East and presumably in other places as well, Texas and so on. So that's drilling in particular and other things. But there's this whole supply chain industry, isn't there, as well? Lots of other jobs that people don't think of. So not just engineering, but things like construction, just the sort of safety management and the compliance and the supply chain stuff.
If you don't work in the industry, I'm not sure that people will understand the diverse engineers. As you said, risk and compliance managers, economists. The list can it's incredible. We're looking at power generation and power delivery. Almost all oil and gas assets, particularly offshore, generate their own power because they have to. And so we have a huge amount of experience in power generation. Large electrical loads. The skills are incredibly diverse, incredibly diverse. I mean, my background, yes, is in large projects and construction, but I'm working in data science and artificial intelligence. Is my primary focus now. So the skills in the oil and gas industry are so diverse and so transferable, but with a lot of them very particularly applicable to geothermal development as well.
Yeah, so I suppose some of them could be picked up with the expansion in offshore wind and solar in terms of the engineering and the construction and the safety stuff. But presumably some of them, like the drilling and the well completion, that's the kind of thing that we either lose or it's the sort of thing that really lends itself, presumably very well to geothermal.
Very, very, very much so. But on offshore wind, there's quite a lot we need to learn from that. Absolutely should be in the mix. Viable source of energy, still room for expansion. The economics of it aren't always being modelled well. You're seeing that the latest licensing rounds have, very few people, there are much fewer companies looking to take up those licenses. So there are things that still need to be worked out there, but we should do it. This isn't to say that this isn't viable. Absolutely, we should get after this. But there have been mistakes made as well, and it's something that we need to make sure we don't do in geothermal, and we do generally. I think it was around about 90% of capex spent in offshore wind went to companies out with the UK. Turbines weren't built here, blades weren't built here, structures weren't built here, moorings weren't built here, boats didn't come from here, and so actually the impact for jobs in the UK was pretty minimal for the amount of capital spent. There were some guidelines suggested by government that in future rounds, 40% of costs should go towards supporting local content. As a guideline, there's no commitment there. I absolutely understand that these need to be cost competitive, and that maybe at the time there was a real need to develop these fields quickly, and simply the supply chain didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so you could argue that these decisions were just necessary, but that still remains. The actual economic benefit out with the production of power wasn't as great as it should be. And so again, that's something that we need to learn as we're developing, and make sure
Yeah.
that actually we do create the biggest economic impact we can.
And we've talked quite a bit in previous podcasts about the amount of money we spent on short-term fixes in terms of energy and money that's gone overseas. So just final question on scale is just the scale of the opportunity. So given we've talked about this sort of size of the oil and gas industry and the expertise and the supply chains, is that the real opportunity here in terms of us really being able to do geothermal homegrown, different in some ways to what you described on offshore wind?
Yeah, I think it is. And we should. There are there's a lot of expertise immediately, and there's a lot of transferable engineering skills. We need to think about it completely differently. A lot of geothermal projects are not going to be the scale of oil and gas development. You're talking, I think there are only 180 offshore platforms left in the UK now. We'd be talking tens of thousands of geothermal projects, but much smaller. So we need to think about scale differently, and supply chains will need to reshape themselves to to accommodate that. But I had need to validate it. But I had heard that if we were drilling at the same if we were drilling at the same rate that for geothermal that Germany is, then we could keep every drill crew working and currently working in the UKCS busy for the next 10 years. So you employ everybody. These are different rigs. It's a different technology. It's a different scale. Working on a very large offshore drill platform is very different to working with a land rig. But still, there are a lot of those skills could still transfer. We need the equipment here. And we need to, but companies need to be able to invest as well to be able to see that happening. And they have to have surety to be able to do that. So at the moment, there are no large-scale land rigs in the UK for these drill crews to operate. And we don't build them in the UK either. So we've got the same problems we just described with wind. And the supply chain has to be ready to meet the demand. But we can do that, and we can plan. The reality is the skills are here, the engineering companies are here that can adapt to do this. But it needs planning. But they need surety as well if you're going to do it, if you're going to invest. So you need the political support, you need the policy. You need to understand the planning constraints, the insurance, to create the environment to allow supply chain companies to invest. Buying a land rig is not cheap. So you need to make sure that you're going to have confident that you're going to have enough drilling contracts to have a decent return on investment for it. But it's doable. It's completely doable.
And thinking about the energy crisis we find ourselves in now, and we talked about that in our last podcast a little, but every decade or so over the past 40 or 50 years, we've seen some form of energy crisis or other. And every time something happens, we then react. You could argue we probably need to be a bit more proactive because it will keep happening, and it seems to be happening at increasingly shorter intervals than decades. But in terms of the oil and gas industry and things I've seen out there in response to the current situation we find ourselves in with Iran, some politicians and things are saying there's arguments for resurrecting oil and gas drilling in the UK. I know that John has published previously on potential left within poorly developed and underdeveloped fields. What are your views on this? Do you think this is feasible and something we should be doing?
Yes, because ultimately there's energy
Yeah,
security and there's affordability. There's often the thought that actually if you're supporting new drilling, that you're just trying to delay the transition, and that's not the case at all. It's about recognizing that we still have a requirement for hydrocarbons at the moment, and we need to manage that transition from hydrocarbons over to other clean sources of energy. Clearly, I wouldn't have been as active as I have been in trying to promote geothermal and other clean energy sources if I didn't deeply believe that. But there are some uncomfortable truths at the moment as well, where, as I said, we're losing engineering skills to go over and work, to go over and work in the Middle East to work for, LNG companies and oil companies, simply to import their product. So we've lost the skills, we've lost the tax revenue, and we're exposing ourselves to global market fluctuations in price. But there's this kind of something needs to be talked about more. We keep talking about the fact that it doesn't matter if we produce our own oil and gas because actually, oil and gas prices are decided on the global market. That is true for some of them. But the reality is that gas, particularly, is generally sold on long-term supply contracts. And if we are producing our own gas, then actually we can control prices. Governments can be part of part of the negotiations to buy that gas, and you can put a cap on what government will be paying for that. The reality is as well, gas coming through a pipeline is a lot more environmentally friendly than gas that has to be compressed, put on a ship, sailed around the world, and then regasified from its liquid form. So which is consuming a whole lot of energy. So actually, if we want to have the lowest carbon intensity, then we're better off producing it ourselves. And again, I need to stress that this isn't about unnaturally prolonging our dependence on hydrocarbons. It's accepting the fact that we have a requirement to use them for the moment, and if we're going to do that, we should try and do that ourselves. It would give surety
yeah,
of price and allow planning. And as with that ability to plan, you can think about the skills transition, you can think about energy transition, because you can plan. What I worry most about is just things going off a cliff edge, and that we lose the companies, the people, the skills, the technology before we have a chance to use it purposefully in the transition.
Yeah, and so sort of looking to the future. All that said, we know that sort of production of oil and gas in the North Sea is down around 75% since peak, and about 90% of the basin, best estimate, has already been extracted. So clearly, we need to look beyond it at the same time. So, and presumably that's why you've diversified yourself. So still in oil and gas, but also diversifying to geothermal. So I'm curious, what do you see as the sort of main synergies between those two, and in particular, what do you think what's the main thing, the one thing that geothermal will offer in the transition that you've just talked about?
And the things that I want to see most is jobs and
Yeah,
economic impact. But we have to accept the fact that there is a difference as well when you're looking at extraction. Oil and gas, you're not producing energy, you're producing a commodity that produces energy when it's burned. And it's not its only use, and it's immensely tradable. And that's not true when you're producing power on local contracts. So you can't have the same economic impact really. But it can create jobs, and it will have a positive environmental impact to see that transition. But if we are going to create jobs in this country as well, which is really a thing that I think we should all be most concerned about, is actually continued economic stability, is lower energy prices. We have to lower energy prices. We have to. for industry and for our consumers. Consumers are artificially protected from high energy prices by the energy price cap. We currently have uncapped liability for the government. If your main sources of energy are still incredibly expensive. So we have to bring down energy costs, and we need to do that to make our industries more competitive, and to stop with governments just leeching cash, to pay the difference, when you're offering consumers a price cap, but you haven't controlled what you pay as a government. That's capital that could otherwise be
And in
invested.
terms of who's going to do geothermal going forwards, I can think of 4 or 5 companies that are active at the moment, and for example, Star Energy, which had roots in oil and gas, are doing geothermal, and we've talked to them about ways in which we could encourage others to do the same. From your point of view, what's your view on the traditional oil and gas companies and their appetite for moving into geothermal, or completely new opportunities being created? And what do you think are the enablers and the kind of barriers to this as well, from your experience of people in the sector?
We haven't seen it too much in the UK, but a lot of the big oil and gas companies are interested in geothermal. I believe Chevron are actually doing quite a lot in the US, and they won't be the only ones. You've also seen the BP support for the project in Bishop Auckland as well, and in drilling there. So there is some interest. These are still commercial organisations, and they have to make money. And I think they know that they can create solid commercial opportunities from geothermal in principle, but they need some surety, to really get them to get involved. And so it needs government to recognise geothermal in the same way that it's recognising other renewable power source, energy sources. We need the guidance around planning and consenting, and we need to create the environment to allow them to invest with some certainty. They are investing in geothermal, some of it in the UK, a lot more of it in the US, and they do see the potential. But it's tentative, with a little bit of reticence at the moment, because they would need to see exactly how this fits into their business, and I think that's not clear. They know the skills are there. They have the subsurface expertise. They have a lot of the data that would allow this to happen as well. Not completely. But there has been a lot of onshore data gathered, across oil and gas drilling in the UK that is available. But it's certainty. It's certainty around investment. At the depths and temperatures that we're looking at, most oil and gas companies can do this, no problem at all. But they need to have the certainty around regulation and the fiscal environment that they're going to be operating in.
And so, thinking about companies moving more into geothermal in this, I think, as we've said before, your mind is almost automatically drawn to thinking about construction and engineering and drilling. But your company is particularly interesting, Imrand, because you're not looking at those things so much as thinking more about data and technology and innovation. So just tell us a little bit about what you're up to at Imrand and in relation to geothermal.
So a lot of the things that we do are immediately transferable. So we gather huge amounts of data and we try and gain insight from that. And we look to understand the completeness, the correctness, consistency of that data to create insight from it. And we gather data from all sorts of odd, fractured, difficult to use data sets. Well, we have used this in geothermal. So when Arup were looking at the size of the prize for geothermal in the UK, and working with Newcastle University, the project had stalled a bit because there was a lot of great work going on, but actually trying to gather all the data from existing oil and gas assets, onshore oil and gas assets in the UK, was proven to be really difficult. And to actually get them to gather all that data for analysis, and we were able to unstick that. Using our harvesting and data cleansing technology, we were able to unstick that in very short order to be able to help that move forward. And there are great skills within the company in terms of data visualization as well, and data gathering. So he supported a project with one of our guys where he was mapped the geothermal potential for the entirety of the UK. So we had all geological information. So worked with BGS and others to gather a heap of information so we can understand the geology of the whole of the UK and the land cover as well. So we would understand the planning constraints. And worked with Aberdeen Drilling School as well to look at, to be able to estimate the cost of drilling into any of these geologies to be able to access the flow and the heat that you would need. So you're able to, say, well, we have a potential project here. What's the available heat? What would be the cost of drilling? And you could quickly, screen, do early stage project screening. But a lot of what we do as well within oil and gas is things like chemical management, and so wells need management, monitor fluids. And with geothermal, you've got a lot of fluids to manage. These fluids are carried through pipework, so we study and we model degradation patterns and the effects of these fluids on the materials that carry them, so we can understand potential failures, planning, cost control. All sorts. So even with a company that such as ours, where you're looking at this industrial data analysis, the reality is it's applied analysis. So as we're saying, we have chemical engineers, material scientists, process engineers, a huge number of skills that are just very, very well informed by data science, and we can take all of that immediately and transfer it over into geothermal.
There's obviously those transferable areas, but there's also some quite key differences which I've just been thinking out in my own head. Probably not well-formed thoughts at this stage, but just as a result of this conversation. But so I'll just put my well-formed thoughts out there and let people kind of make their own judgment. But I'm just thinking, I think geothermal, there are those similarities, but then we need these kind of different approaches to prospecting, because like for oil and gas, you're finding a reservoir and you're not really worrying about who's going to use it, because you're taking the stuff out of the ground and it's piped and distributed globally if necessary. But for geothermal, it's got to be kind of local, and also it's non-consumptive as well. So that's not really related to the prospecting side, but there are those key differences which link to the licensing and regulation as well. The fact geothermal's not consumptive, but also this kind of more place-based approach for geothermal links with some work we've been doing, looking at project archetypes and looking at where you might do them on the top side. And that's what they did successfully in the Netherlands. I think when they embraced the fact that they wanted to upscale their uptake of geothermal heat, they actually got the subsurface data they had and mapped it against where their heat demands were, and they found there was massive gaps. So I think that's something that we could learn from. And the kind of next question, I suppose, builds on that by saying the opportunities for technology and innovation development more generally in geothermal, and looking at how we can use what we know from other sectors to kind of embrace those differences and build on it as well.
Yeah, looking at what's been happening in the Netherlands,
because they're similar to us, aren't they, in terms of the energy mix and the gas producers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But looking at development of geothermal in the Netherlands, the two key things that I heard, I think it was their energy minister speak about this, that helped to the development, was the availability of data. So you could screen projects really quickly. So as a government initiative, they made that geological information readily available. So understanding where the heat is and how easy is it to access, so that if you have a project, you can make that evaluation really, really quickly. The other thing that they did was focus on rapid licensing. So that if you have a project, you don't get bound up in years of red tape trying to get your project approved, but have clear guidelines as to what it takes to be approved. It's having that regulatory and fiscal environment where actually you know exactly what controls you've got to put in place, and if you can put them in place, you can get approved very quickly. So actually, it was rapid development. So you identify your opportunity and you get moving really quickly. And I think we can do that here. But it is different. It is very, very different to oil and gas because, as you said, it's non-consumptive. and it's it's far less hazardous. It's not without any kind of large scale engineering. It's not without risk. And it's always about control and management of risk. One of the things I'm really interested in is with geothermal, and one of the things that I find really attractive about it is the potential for local and community involvement in energy projects because of the scale and because of where it can be. So as we were saying earlier, oil and gas is big, multi-million, into the hundreds of millions or billions for development, and it's always going to be corporate. When you look at a lot of other energy projects, they take land. Yeah, we can have some small scale solar development on people's houses, which is great. Absolutely, I'm not being dismissive of anything, but it's understanding the scale of each of them. But wind particularly takes land, it takes space. A figure that I heard at the Royal Society meeting last year was that less than 0.25% of energy projects in the UK could be considered local or community energy projects. That's pitifully low. And it's a stated aim of GB Energy to make sure that a substantial number of new energy projects should be local and community-driven projects. And I think that's hugely important, especially if we're going to lower energy costs for consumers and communities and remove some of that burden. And geothermal is one of the few ways I think we can do that, because actually the footprint's really small. And again, it's avoiding left behind communities. It's exactly what I was saying at the beginning about the transition generally. But, where we have seen local and community energy projects, they've been on, one of the Western Isles, remote parts of the Highlands, where the communities have been gifted land by a previous landowner. So if you're in an inner city or a council estate, what's your opportunity to participate in a local energy, project? Now, we often talk about, rural energy projects because they're probably the easiest ones to find the space for. But yeah, geothermal presents that opportunity for much, much broader community involvement that I think is much harder to replicate with other sources.
Okay, so that's really interesting. The community involvement, and I think as we coming to the end of our conversation here, and just pulling it all together in my mind, I'm thinking about the country and the government and what the government can do to make this happen. And it sort of strikes me that the government, or we, have two huge problems. Well, more than two, but two in the context of this conversation.
Yeah.
So one is around a sort of depleting energy source, and you've talked about the need for cheap energy for growth and just for for people, for better lives. So we've got that depleting energy resource, and on the other hand, we have a whole industry, the oil and gas industry, which is dependent, has been dependent on that resource for jobs. And so it seems geothermal is offering huge potential to sort of solve both of these problems.
Or at least contribute. I think we've got to remember that we're not talking about the same things as well. As I said, what you're producing with oil and gas is a commodity that can produce energy if it's burned, and it has huge economic impact, and is globally tradable. With all renewables, that's not what we're talking about. But but it does have the opportunity.
And so, what would you say? What do you think the government, in terms of the role it can play? What would you say the main steps the government need to take to help make that happen?
And straight off, give it the same weighting within government policy as every other renewable energy source. Straight off, recognise it in the same way. When all government planning for the development of renewables, give geothermal the same weighting as everything else. First step, just recognise it. Second would be create the regulatory environment to allow rapid licensing, and create and then next create the fiscal environment to allow investment. And really, if we can focus on these three things, we will go a long, long way. That would probably be my big asks. A lot of jobs could transfer over into geothermal. Could they all transfer over? No, but a lot of them could. It's being realistic about what can be achieved. There is huge potential for the transfer over, But if we can create, cheap, affordable energy, we can create other jobs as well. So it's, people as they transfer over into other industries, those industries can be supported by this. It's all part of having coherent energy policy that will support industrial growth, which we need to do. And geothermal will play a really important part in that, and the oil and gas industry can play a really important part in the development of geothermal.
Innes, it's been wonderful and fascinating chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Strictly Geothermal.
It's been a pleasure. You gave me the opportunity to talk, and clearly I enjoy doing that. And it's on a topic that I feel really passionate about. So I'm delighted to join you. And thanks for putting up with me.
We can see how passionate you are about it, and thanks from me as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that's it for our third episode in the can. It was another great conversation, Charlotte.
Yes, thanks for joining us to listen, and big thanks to Innes for sharing his experience and views on geothermal's place, and also in relation to opportunities for the oil and gas sector in the future. So we're delighted to have had that conversation, and thanks again for listening.
Thanks, everyone. Strictly Geothermal is the official podcast of the National Geothermal Centre. The centre aims to accelerate understanding and uptake of geothermal energy in the UK. Follow us on our web pages or at LinkedIn.